What is the
Okay.
Okay. If I may, Rabbi, I want to introduce you. You deserve an introduction and an opening act. Good evening, everybody. My name is Akiva Balter. I'm the founder of Gamzum Latova, and it's on this platform that you're getting to join Chabad of Etobicoke summer lecture series of 5783. I want to thank Rabbi Blotner for this opportunity. It's a privilege and a great merit to be able to host it on the GZL platform. Moreover, as we're dealing with life issues, if you have any questions, if you know of anybody who has concerns about plots, burials, funerals, please call me. If you have questions or pondering about the existence of paradise and hell, that speak to the rabbi. I'm not involved in that. I'm only involved in the road to get you to the other world. But from that point on, the rabbi will provide his experts. So again, if you have any tech questions, please email me here on the GZL network. It's a privilege and honor to present to you the one and only Rabbi Danny Blotner of Chabad of Etobicoke. It's all yours.
Thank you. And oh wow, thank you. As just to give Hakaras Atova, it's called, to give appreciation where due. The man who was just speaking, his name is Akiva Balter. He runs a podcast or a Zoomcast business called Gam Zoom Latova. To play on words, Gam Zoom Latova means also this is for the good. So Zoo means in Hebrew this. So he played around Zoom Latova, also this, and he is actually supplying the platform for the remote learning. There's a bunch of people watching from a distance and able to participate from the comfort of their homes or unable to make it out here. And he made this available, as well as much of this shir and class and sessions, these 5 weeks that we have for this Torah course, the Torah Sushi Social, is co-sponsored by the Benjamin Monument Legacy of Yad Vashem, sponsored by Yad Vashem. And if you want the information, if you have family, friends, or people, acquaintances that need to be in touch regarding the important and respectful ways of burial and so on and so forth, you could always reach out to, I have the information on the email, and you can come over with me, I can tell you that as well. So a huge thank you for that. I would like to, as well, dedicate this class in particular for 2 things. Number 1, a refuah shalema, a speedy recovery for a mother of a dear friend of ours. And her name is Rivka Bat Miriam. Just a few weeks ago, their family got news that his mom has cancer, and they're going to be operating on Monday, this coming Monday, in South America. And so we want to say, we have some wine on the table. You could say l'chaim, you could say l'chaim on water, that Rivka Bat Miriam should have a complete and speedy recovery. L'chaim. A full glass of vodka, that's a little much.
Yeah.
And secondly, but definitely not least, this Friday is Nancy's father's first yahrzeit. Nancy Marks, her dad's first yahrzeit is this Friday on Rosh Chodesh Elul, the first day of Elul, very, very special day of the month. And her dad's first yahrzeit is this year, and his name is Chaim David Ben Tzvi, David Marks. So Chaim David Ben Tzvi, his neshama should have an elevation. And we studied a couple of weeks ago that when we do something on behalf of someone, it actually has a strong effect on them wherever they might find themselves. So we wish that for a blessing for his soul, as well as a positive effect for his family and those who knew him, and are connected with him. So l'chaim to that. And finally, l'chaim to all of you that are here around the table today, as well as those who are joining us remotely. As I want to put the main emphasis on those in the room, I'm going to touch back at the screen, but I hope it's not going to be a disturbance, just an enhancement. So I couldn't think of a better thing to have by a kosher class than food. And I actually, kosher food is probably one of the most misinterpreted or wrongly assumed ideas in Judaism. And I say that not lightly, but I had multiple times actually, I was just saying about in Etobicoke, everyone tells me they're the only Jew in town. So I was in Home Depot, I think it was when I was building these shelving units in the basement, I put these together. So when I was in Home Depot getting it, I was coming back from work, so I was wearing my jacket, and one of the guys sees me, he's like, Rabbi, are you a rabbi? I said, yeah. He's like, what are you doing at Home Depot? I said, rabbis also go to Home Depot, I'm a DIY type of guy. So he tells me, he says, I'm not Jewish, and with all due respect, I just wanted to know, what's the idea with kosher? Well, a little random, but, what's your question? He said, so like, I had a friend that I was going to go out to a restaurant with him, and he told me that he can't go because it's not kosher. But he told me that if a rabbi blesses the food, then it is kosher. So I said, that's a very common misconception. And my father's dealing in kosher certification for close to 50 years. And that's probably one of the number one, even the people from these big, huge companies like Pepsi and Pringles and all these companies that he might do kosher certification for, sometimes the guys on the top are like, oh, so you bless the food? Like, has nothing to do with blessing. It has to do with kosher certification is making sure that the ingredients are up to par with the kosher standard. So it's nothing in a very, mundane way. Keeping kosher is a very practical thing, not a holy thing. But we're going to touch into that. So about the kosher supervision and rabbinical supervision, it was my father told me not long ago that he had a friend in Worcester, Massachusetts. That's where my parents live. And a guy tells him, he says, Rabbi, they're on a walk. He said, Rabbi, could you just wait right here? They stop by a not kosher, restaurant. And he says, I just want to run in and get something. My father's looking at him, not kosher, but this guy thought he was more knowledgeable. And he runs in and he says, but Rabbi, could you just look through the window, just watch me for a minute? And he orders this, pasta in this Italian restaurant. It's obviously not kosher. It has cheese, and he's about to sit down. And my father knocks on the window. He calls him out. He says, "What's going on?" He says, "Rabbi." My father says, "You just want to let you know, it's not kosher." He says, "What do you mean? You're standing here and watching. It's under rabbinical supervision." My father says, "Not so fast, buddy. There's a couple of other steps to the game." But what if you open up, you have your booklet that has some of the sources and has a little bit of the background, and whenever studying something, and when we're just having a brief conversation, someone wants to know what's the deal with kosher, I can give you the information off the cuff. But those who are here tonight felt it important that they actually want to know what's going on and not just a little bit of a taste. So the most important thing and the most beautiful thing actually in Judaism is that we have a source for everything. We have a source, we have an explanation, we have a reason, we have a why, and we are open for questions. We want questions, we invite questions, and we always like to debate and to discuss and ask. That's what we do best. So our question right now is kosher. Why kosher? Not what kosher. What kosher? We're going to see the Torah says what means kosher. We're going to see many, many people discuss how something could be kosher. There's books and books, and what if a piece of meat falls into a piece of milk, and what. So that's all about how kosher. And there's many books written on that. How do you keep kosher? How can I start keeping kosher? What can I eat that's kosher? No problem. The Torah itself has very, very little about why kosher. It's like, okay, but why? Okay, I get it. You got to keep kosher, and it's going to give you the whole list of how it's kosher and what's not kosher. But why? And that's a lot of people shy away from that question of why. But again, as Jews and as a rabbi, we jump on those questions. Love those questions. Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes you get yourself into some hot water, but it's good. It's good questions, and we're going to figure this out. Now, there is a fable or a myth that kosher has to do with health. That's probably the number one answer you're going to get from most people, especially, people of the older generation, when their children will ask them, Mom, Dad, Zeta, Baba, Grandpa, Oma, Opa, what do I have to keep kosher for? It's slaughter, this, that. You say, listen, my dear son, my dear child, my dear granddaughter, it's the healthy way of eating, which we're going to venture into that, because is that really what it is? Was Moses the first doctor and he came up with this genius idea? The problem, just off the cuff, the problem with the incorrect, I'm telling you already now, incorrect assumption that it's health-wise, the issue with that is that many people will dismiss kosher now, because had Moses had a refrigerator, things would be different. If he had the FDA, okay, obviously, back in the desert when they were who knows what, this was health. But come on, nowadays, the milk and meat or the bacon that you're eating, it's not dirty. It's just as clean as the hot dogs that you're eating that are kosher. Which actually, I had an Italian principal growing up. We had a Hebrew studies principal and a general studies principal. My general studies principal, his name was Aldo Bianca. Italian fellow, not Jewish, really, really nice guy, very knowledgeable. And of course, in seventh grade, we loved him because he played basketball with us like a few times a year. And he told us actually that he only eats certain meats, he only eats kosher. He sees how they process it elsewhere, but he feels most comfortable with kosher. But that's not the reason why, and we're going to see what's going to be wrong with it. So before we venture into kosher, I'm going to treat you to a piece of Talmud, and it's on page 3 in your, I've emailed out the PDF file, and I dropped it off by a couple of people who are following on Zoom. And you have it in front of you on page 3, keeping kosher. So before we venture into the kosher, there is a mysterious and somewhat enigmatic verse or passage in the Talmud that seems very cryptic, and we're going to read it, and then we're going to come back to it and see where it falls in and what it means. So I'm going to ask Roberto to please lead us on text number 1.
Talmud, okay. Rab Chanan said, there are 3 types of dreams which signify peace, namely about a river, a beer, and a kettle.
So Rab Chanan in the Talmud, it discusses it's the formation of Jewish law, how the formation, or really it's backwards. Once there was the laws, the Torah laws, it was the discussion of how it came about and what's the origin. So amongst the Talmud is also many stories, many different episodes and occurrences. So here, Rab Chanan, he says a statement which isn't, sounds a little random, but you're going to see it's going to be even more random. He says there are 3 dreams that a person could have. If someone has certain things in a dream, it could mean something. It could indicate something. Most times dreams are just, so excess thoughts or whatever you've been thinking during the day, it just continues on thinking. However, a dream could carry meaning. It discusses in the Talmud, a person dreams of a elephant, says that there's going to be miracles happening to them because it starts with a pill, not just something you swallow. Pill in Hebrew means an elephant. And then it says, if you dream of Pinchas, again, a couple different things, different dreams of what it might indicate. That's for a different class, actually. There's a whole beautiful class about dreams. So we're not going to go into that right now. But he does say there's 3 things that signify peace. It's going to be peaceful. What are the 3 things a person dreams of? And everyone's going to go to sleep tonight trying to dream of these things. I know it works.
Elephants only.
We're going to see, what are these 3 things?
A river, for it is written, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river.
So it states that, Hashem, God gives over peace like a river spreads out, so he spreads out peace. Okay, the next thing is,
A beard, for it is written, as beards hovering, so will the Lord of hosts protect Jerusalem.
so it's a protection to Jerusalem, just like a bird hovers over its nest. So that's again peace.
A pod, for it is written, God, you will establish peace for us.
So the word establish in Hebrew, it says, I'm not sure if you have it in the footnote as well, the word establish peace. The word establish could also, the Hebrew word, it's like it has the same lettering, same wording, could mean the word place a pot. It could mean to place a pot. So placing a pot and peace can have a similar meaning. Okay, so that's the Talmud that we're venturing into. It says that a river, a bird, and a kettle, or a pot, these things, someone dreams of it, it's connected to peace. Now, what does a river, a bird, and a pot have anything to do with something peace? What's peaceful about a river, a bird, and a pot, besides for maybe sitting by a river, listening to birds chirping and smoking pot? No. What is it that's peaceful about these things? So we're going to keep that on the back burner, and we're going to venture into the discussion of kosher, and we're going to tie into this really at the end. So let's jump right in to kosher. This is the source of kosher. There's two sources over here in Vayikra. Vayikra is in Leviticus. It discusses the laws of kosher, and it reads through all the things that must be kosher, must not be kosher. So God spoke to Moses and Aaron, and he said to them, and Mike, would you like to read a little bit? Source number 2,
Sure.
the text 2a.
And God spoke to Moses and to Aaron to say to them, speak to the children of Israel, saying, there are the creatures that you may eat among all the animals on earth. Any animal that has a cloven hoof that is completely split into double hoofs, and which brings up its cud, that one you may eat. But these you shall not eat among those that bring up the cud. And those that have a cloven hoof, the camel, because it brings up its cud, but does not have a completely cloven hoof, it is unclean for you. And the hyrax, because it brings up its cud, but will not have a completely cloven hoof, it is unclean for you. And the hare, because it brings up its cud, but does not have a completely cloven hoof, it is unclean for you. And the pig, because it has a cloven hoof that is completely split, but will not regurgitate its cud, it is unclean for you. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses, they are unclean for you. Among all creatures that are in the water, you may eat these. Any of the creatures in the water that has fins and scales, those you may eat, whether it lives in the waters, in the seas, or in the rivers. But any creatures that do not have fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, among all the creeping creatures in the water and among all living creatures that live in the water, are an abomination for you.
So here we clearly have a list. It's not an extensive list, but God also gives a little bit of how to judge some of the lists and the checklist for yourself. An animal that chews its cud and has split hooves. Now there are animals that are mentioned here that have one or the other, right? And then the pig has become the icon of not kosher food because it's the only animal that has complete split hooves, like a cow, goat, sheep, giraffe, a bunch of these other kosher animals has a completely split hoof. The hoof is totally split. However, it doesn't chew its cud. So in some way, it represents the element of not kosher even more because it said that just at face value, it makes itself look kosher. It has split hooves, but you'll notice that it's not chewing its cud. There was an old timer who was, she grew up in Toronto, and kept kosher all her life, but the smell of the bacon was something that always irritated or tickled her nostrils. And finally, she decided she wanted to try out. Wants to go to a place and finally taste a little bit of it. What is this big thing, this special, this swine and pig, whatever it might be that's listed on that menu. So she decided she can't do it here because she knows too many people. So when she goes on vacation to Prince Edward Island, not as Jewish as Toronto, she's going to go to some restaurant. So she comes in, this lady Sally, she comes in and she orders boar's head. She's going to go all at it. And it's a fancy restaurant and they're bringing it to her. And while they bring it to her, she looks over to the next table and she sees someone from her same temple. And she sees the Goldsteins and she's like, oh no, the Goldsteins are going to see me. This is going to be terrible. So the waiter's walking, what she's supposed to do, the waiter's walking and she puts down the swine's head right in front of Sally. And Sally turns to the Goldsteins like, wow, this is one way to dress up an apple. Trying to make as if she doesn't order the apple. So the Torah says very clearly what we could and can't eat. But again, it doesn't give any reason. It says it's an abomination, a terrible thing. It's really disgusting, but it doesn't say why, when, how, what's wrong with it. It's just God doesn't like the flavor. What's wrong? The next verse gives a little bit more clarity, and then we're going to pick up Speedo John. Would you like to read it a little bit?
Sure.
Text 2b.
Any creature that goes on its belly, and any creature that walks on 4 legs, to any creature that has many legs, among all creeping creatures that creep on the ground, you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping creature that creeps, and you shall not defile yourselves with them, that you should become unclean through them. For I am the Lord your God, and you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, because I am holy, and you shall not defile yourselves through any creeping creature that crawls on the ground. For I am the God who has brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, because I am holy.
So now we have something to hold on to. I mean, it's holy, so it's going to be hard to hold on to it, but we have something to talk about. God says a why. Finally, there's a why. Why should you keep kosher? Because God is holy. Okay, that helps us, but what does that mean? What does it mean? So you should be holy. What does it mean to be holy? What does it mean be holy because God is holy? How does it mean to be holy? So this is where we venture into, again, a very expensive topic, but we're going to discuss it in as much as I can in a brief time, of the idea of something called a chok. A chok is a stature. A chok is a irrational and almost like a decree, a decision that God made, and we don't know the reason for it. In Torah, there are 3 types of mitzvahs. There are mitzvot that there are 3 categories. There's mishpatim, eidos, and chukim. And in English, that is, mishpatim are statutes, are laws, are regular civil laws that make sense. Respect your parents, don't kill, don't steal. Those are all mitzvahs, but you kind of could have figured that out yourself, or at least it makes a lot of sense once you're told it. Don't steal, don't kill, don't commit adultery. All these things that make a lot of sense. Then there's eidos, which are memorable mitzvahs, things to commemorate, which you wouldn't invent them yourself, but now that they are around, okay, there's a good reason. Passover, to commemorate that we left Egypt. Okay, deal. Everyone has holidays. Sukkot, Hanukkah, all of our holidays are such. Some things, tzitzit. Tzitzit are to have tzitzit, for a man to wear tzitzit. It's because, again, to remember the 613 mitzvot so that he won't do anything, go do anything wrong. Shabbat. Shabbat is to commemorate that God created the world in 7 days, in 6 days, and then rested on the 7th. So that's the second. The third type of mitzvah is a mitzvah that's called a chok. A chok means God doesn't give a reason. There's no reason given right there. there are reasons discussed, and there's philosophers that discuss why and how, but the Torah itself doesn't give a reason, and sometimes we really don't know. In Kabbalah, a lot of Kabbalah gives a lot of reasons for the mitzvahs that we don't know. But again, even those reasons sometimes, for example, shatnez, about mixing milk and meat, or so it speaks that they come from different sources. One's Gemura, one's Chesed, one comes from giving, and one comes from taking back, so they can't mix. Again, it gives a little reason, but again, it's a little bit Kabbalistic. But so we're going to see being holy is also a chok. Being holy, what does being holy mean? And why should someone be holy? There's not necessarily a pressing reason to become holy. It's more of a you're jumping into it. Kedusha in general, holiness in general, is under that same status. So we see now that ultimately God basically bundled this together, that there's kosher and holy. And keeping kosher has to do with being holy. And we do these things just because. This is what God told us, that's just because. We are open to exploring why and questioning and understanding, but the bottom line is, why do you do it? Just because. Just because. This is what we do as Jews. This is what we do. There's certain things we do as humans. We wear clothing. Why? What's wrong? I'm gonna give you health benefits of wearing clothing, social benefits. You could disprove a lot of reasons for things, but this is what we do. This is human beings. This is what's socially acceptable. This is what we do. Kashrus as well. Keeping kosher as well, we do it because this is what God expects from us. And I'm just going to jump to text 3b. Is Tatiana, if you would like to read the text 2b. We're going to see when things 3b, sorry. When we get to holiness, when we get to things that don't have an absolute reason and explanation that you can write down on paper, we're going to see who jumps on the bandwagon and uses this against us. Please.
The Satan, evil inclination objects to them these commandments to mislead the Jews, saying the Torah isn't true, for what is the purpose of all these commandments? Therefore, it written about them, statute I God decreed them upon you.
So this is exactly where the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, sometimes jumps on a person and says, you see, here's one or two mitzvahs that don't make sense. Means the whole thing doesn't make sense, which isn't true. And God indicates many times that, yes, this is a mitzvah that you're not going to understand, but you still need to do it. If you think about it for a moment, if God is our creator, then he probably is a little bit smarter than us, just a little bit, at least give him a little credit, right? So it makes sense that he gives us instructions of things that we don't fully comprehend. Just like a child, and I see this many times with my children, I see it sometimes with my students. Might give them instructions and they don't understand why they need instructions. Why do I need to follow that? So we went rope coursing during the summer. I went with my students. So this was something that I experienced. The rope course instructor, the one who was showing us that, he told us how you're supposed to put on the hook. So myself included, I was thinking to myself, it makes a difference if you put it on that way or you put it on the other way. That's what my thought was. Now, I was mature enough to follow his instructions, but some of my students weren't. And they were like, what's the difference? So they put it on the wrong way. And right when they went up the ladder, it got stuck. And I was like, wow, it was a powerful message for me, because however smart I might be, or however smart I might think I am, rope course is something I don't have experience in. So this fellow is telling me, buddy, I've been on these courses, I've been on these trees trekking for years now, just follow these instructions. If he's going to have to explain to me the reason of everything, I would have went to rope course school instead of went and had fun for 3 hours, right? So this as well, many times God gives us an instruction. He tells us, do like this. And sometimes we understand it. And sometimes he gives us the reasoning. Sometimes he says, trust me, follow my instructions. And on the contrary, you could try to think and figure out reasons. That's okay. But ultimately, we're doing it because this is what God wants. That is holy, which we're going to touch back in a moment. But that is the idea of holiness. Yes.
think he just gives you more ways to connect with him. I
Oh.
think that's what the reason is for the mitzvot that aren't described.
Okay, that's very valid. You're saying he's giving you more opportunities. Here's another opportunity to connect. My counter to that, or my question is, why specifically that? Why couldn't he tell us to drink Coca-Cola and connect to him by drinking Coke? Why is it that, why can't I eat a ham sandwich, but I could eat a kosher burger? That's our question. But the idea is very true. What you're sharing is that's the ultimate truth. Is that God is not looking to give us a hard time. He's looking for more ways to connect. So now let's delve into, for a quick moment, this idea, this thought, or the suggestion that maybe kosher has to do with health. Torah cares about our health. Doesn't just care about our spiritual being, cares about our health and our physical being. There are certain laws that are only because of health. There's certain things that, that are laws in the Torah that you have to follow because this is what is safe. There's a mitzvah that if a person has a roof or a patio or a spot, whatever it might be, that might be at a high height, there's a mitzvah, and you even make a bracha on it to put up a fence. Just like you make a bracha on a mezuzah, you have a bracha on a fence. What's the blessing you make on a fence? I don't know, what on earth? But there's a blessing. Why? It's not because anything spiritual and because God is going to love you if you make a fence. It's because it's safety. So Torah cares about our well-being. So with this in mind, we're in text 4, the Maimonides, name is Moshe ben Maimon, who we discuss a lot in these classes because he discusses philosophy, he discusses a lot of Torah law. He was called it says about him, it says actually in Tiberias and by his grave, it says engraved on his tombstone, it says from Moshe, his name was Moshe as well. It says from Moses, until Moses, there was no one like Moses. Meaning from the time of Moses coming down from Mount Sinai till Maimonides, there's no one that's parallel to his greatness and his depth and inclusiveness in his Torah study. So he has a book, writings called The Guide to the Perplexed. They say that if you read it and you're perplexed, it'll clarify. And if you're not perplexed and don't have these questions, you start reading it, sometimes it can mix you up because he analyzes things that if you didn't have these questions, you're now given questions and now you start to question things you weren't thinking about. So, but it's fascinating. And over there, he actually says, we're going to see text number 4. Nancy, would you like to read text number 4?
Sure.
We're on page 10. Page 10, text number 4.
Food that is forbidden by the law is unwholesome. There is nothing among the forbidden kinds of food whose injurious character is doubted, except pork and forbidden fats. But also in these cases, the doubt is not justified. For pork contains more moisture than necessary for human nutrition and too much superfluous matter. The principal reason why the law scorns swine's flesh is due to the circumstance that its habits and its food are very dirty and loathsome. It has already been pointed out how emphatically the law enjoys the removal of the sight of loathsome objects, even in the field and in the camp. How much more objectionable is such a sight within the towns? If it were allowed to eat swine's flesh, the streets and homes would be dirtier than any cesspool, as may be seen at present in the country of Sarfat.
Which I believe is France at that time.
The fat of the
In the
intestines
1100s.
makes us full, interrupts our digestion, and produces cold and thick blood. It is more fit for fuel than for human consumption. Blood and nevela, the flesh of an animal that died naturally, are indigestible and injurious as food. Treifa, an animal in a diseased state, is in the process of becoming nevela.
So the Rambam, Maimonides, makes a very strong argument that God was simply worried about our health. These are unhealthy foods. And the FDA, or I'm not sure what it's called here in Canada, the Consumption Bureau, the Bureau of Food and that take care of health, the health department wasn't around in those days. So we needed a little bit of divine intervention to let us know what's healthy and what's not. And he gives a very clear reason why these things are not healthy. He gives a very practical, simplistic reason. Kosher is healthier. Nachmanides, who lived a little bit after the Rambam, or they overlap, but he lived a little bit later, or Moshe ben Nachman, he gives a similar reasoning. And Kimberly, would you like to see text 5, what Nachmanides says?
Sure. The reason for the rule requiring fins and scales is that such fish always live in the top of the water, which is clear, and they grow from the oxygen that enters there. Those without fins and scales always dwell in the depths of the water that are murky.
So here, he seems to sound very similar to the Maimonides, and he says that it's all about the health. Now, I have to say that the Maimonides and the Nachmanides knew or understood that it wasn't just because of health. It wasn't just, God was only giving a very simplistic health concern. They also felt there was more to it, but their main focus was the health. And this is what we're going to address in a moment. We have from there's a Dr. Julius Preus that he wrote up a whole, not just thesis, he wrote a lot from his studies on Torah and medicine and how they connect or intertwine. And this is the introduction that he has for kashrut, for kosher laws. And Jason, would you like to read text number 6?
The biblical dietary laws are included in the chapter on hygiene solely because we can conceive of no reason other than sanitary for their ordination. It must be emphasized, however, that the Torah gives us no reason at all for these laws, and the later sources do so only rarely. Thus, nearly everything which one alleges to be the reason for the dietary laws is only a hypothesis and is read into the sources.
So he says, it's nice, it's true, it's a hygiene related, but you got to remember there's a lot more beneath the surface. Now, we already discussed, what the issues of the hygiene theory is, but I'm wondering if anyone had any thoughts of what might be a reason for kosher, or do you feel that it is connected to the hygiene? Do you feel that that's a good enough reason for God to command it to us? Do you think that there might be something else? What might be that something else? Opening the floor for a minute, if anyone had any thoughts. Yes.
I think someone mentioned this already. It's something that you can do. I mean, eating is fundamental to your life. You eat 3 meals a day. So it is something that you can do to reestablish your faith to God. This whole thing that you talked about being a hook, to make it that it's holy. It's very simple. You shouldn't, and I also believe that you shouldn't in life be able to do everything. So it also gives you.
You shouldn't, meaning
one person should not
be
be allowed full reign to do everything that you want in
okay.
life.
So it's a certain impulse control.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's also one is impulse control, but it's done in such a way that if I keep kosher, if I'm making a choice to go, I can either have the bacon thing, something with bacon BLT, or I can have some kosher meat.
Right.
I'm making that choice.
It gives you those opportunities to make a decision and
Right.
make a good one. I like that. I think that has a lot of truth to it.
I think it's very simple that from the very beginning, there's just rules of, I don't want you to eat certain things, like, hey, don't eat this apple. But like, that's just the rule. That's
Interesting.
what it is. So
I never thought about the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge.
That's really good.
That's a very interesting connection.
it's just, there's rules.
And
There's that.
it's actually, the apple, most Jewish sources, or I say, there is no Jewish source that says there's an apple. You know that?
yeah.
It's from Michelangelo's pictures. There is a discussion if it was a fig tree, or if it was a grapevine. And the school of thought that says that it was a fig tree it says that with the leaves, they covered themselves afterwards. And fig trees have very, very large leaves. The school of thought that says that it was grapes was that God wanted him, Adam and Eve, to hold themselves back and not eat from the tree of knowledge just for the last 3 hours of the day. They were created the last 3 hours before on Friday afternoon. And the plan was for them to actually take those grapes, make grape juice or wine, whatever, and make kiddush on it on Friday night. And the wine smelled too good. They couldn't hold it. That's where, but that is a very interesting connection. I like that. So actually, we're going to have right now Rabbi Dan Yosef Yitzchak, Dan Yitzchak Abarbanel, who lived in Toledo and in Portugal and France, and he was not in France, in Spain. He was actually the treasurer and very, very, very close to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He tried to prevent the Inquisition. Unfortunately, they actually offered him to stay because he was their treasurer and he was doing a really good job. And so they offered him to stay, and he was the leader of the Jewish community also. He's like, I can't stay here when you're kicking all the Jews out. So he actually left with them. So he is very, very against the Rambam and the Maimonides and Nachmanides. He thinks their opinion is outrageous. That can't be. Let's hear what he has to say. It's a little bit longer. Source text number 7.
After explaining the verses, it is appropriate to explain the reason why the Torah forbids these foods. The prohibition of non-kosher food that the Torah sets in place has been thought by many to be for health reasons, being that these foods generate harmful fluids. This is the opinion of Nachmanides in his writings on these verses.
He lived about 250 years after Nachmanides, and he's going to battle with him. Hear what he has to say.
It would be a desecration for me to believe so, for if so, the godly Torah would be categorized as a small book, one among the medical writings which are limited in the matters of reasoning. This is not the way of God's Torah and the depth of its intentions. Additionally, our eyes see Gentiles eating flesh of the abominable pig and rodents and other prohibited birds and animals and fish, and they were all alive and well, solid, without fatigue or weakness. There are herbs and plants as well whose poison is fatal, and the Torah does not prohibit their consumption.
He gives a really good counter argument. He says, come on, first of all, he says it doesn't make sense that Torah would occupy itself or only occupy itself with just telling us a dietary law keeping healthy. Number 2, he says you see non-Jewish people eating all these other foods, which there's nothing wrong with them doing so, and they're living nice, healthy, beautiful lives. So it can't be that this kosher food is healthier, because not kosher food, why is everyone that's not Jewish all nice and healthy? And why, I would take it a step further, then everyone should keep the kosher. We want everyone to be healthy. God's telling this special secret, Jews don't want you to be healthy. No, it doesn't make sense. And finally, he says that there are many things in the world that are fatal. There are many, we won't go into about the mushrooms in China, but there are many things that are fatal and that could make people not safe to consume. And Torah doesn't give you a list of those vegetables, right? Or fruit or berries or whatever it is. So ultimately, he doesn't give a reason, but he disproves, right? Good Jewish argument. I don't have a reason, but you're definitely wrong. He disproves, and he says it can't be. It can't be that's the reason. Following with him, there's the Akedas Yitzchak, who writes very similar. He wants to give a little bit of a step in that direction. So there's text number 8, and he says that if health was the reason, it would be possible to remedy these foods by mixing them with other foods and condiments, which would neutralize the harmful elements. Because many fatal or poisonous or unsafe foods, many times they're only unsafe if consumed alone. But if they're consumed with other things, other foods could counter their poisonous effects, and then it would neutralize it. So such methods are employed in medicine. You know, potentially harmful drugs are mixed with the other components to produce a healing potion. So accordingly, if that's the concern, right, if the health was the reason for kashrut, then the prohibition would be absolute. It would be absolutely rendering the Torah as a fraud, because pig is only not kosher if you eat it just plain. But if I would have it mixed into X, Y, and Z, if I would have a lard as part of my cookie dough, then what should be the problem? Which is not the case. So he totally negates the idea, and he says that it's impossible for it to be a health concern. So one of the most accepted reasons for kosher being healthy, Jews eat healthier, has just been debunked. It's not true. Yes.
If I may say, now with that, as you said, I'd just like to add, going back to what Hashem initially stated. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy because I am holy. And I imagine that would be the reason.
Right. He didn't say be healthy because I am healthy.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's going to be on that field. Thank you.
What's the example of food that's poisonous without being mixed with something else?
And not.
The stuff the rabbi question.
So I'll tell you, there are ingredients and different things that alone could be fatal or could be concerning and unhealthy. For example, there are so I saw this a long time ago, that inside the pits of apples and peaches, the inside pit is a softer pit, is a softer thing. So there's a certain chemical in there that if someone would consume a lot of those pits, it could be very harmful. I actually just saw recently a study that they could also extract from there a certain healing element. Many chemicals or herbs, and this is not just the Torah, this is not just, I haven't seen it from a Torah source, I actually saw it from a medical source, and I don't know the names of these things offhand. Many herbs are effective on their own, but when blended and mixed, it neutralizes it. Certain foods, when you add in a fat, it neutralizes it.
Like if you take blood pressure medicine, you can have grapefruit.
Right, and we just saw it.
We just have got an allergy medication for my daughter. She has allergy. So on it says no grapefruit and no grapefruit juice, like if she's on the medication.
There are, and apparently, this I read as part of the story, but apparently certain poisons, certain natural poisons, if someone ingests it, they could consume a stronger poison, I think that's the way, but basically another poisonous thing, and that will counter the first poison thing. I don't remember if it was weaker or stronger. I think it was.
That sounds like throwing
They do it
good
with
money after
drugs.
bad or something.
No, it's something.
They do it with
it's
drugs.
If someone takes
So if dirty-
overdoses, they can take a certain drug, that if you and I would just take that.
Like the non-saline
Or
fats.
like,
So you can take like fentanyl is
Yeah,
what you use for an epidural sometimes. And then the baby may have problems when the baby comes out, so they give the baby Narcan.
Mhm.
And that corrects the respiratory.
Something of that sort, but it is something to
Sorry.
discover more the details, but
I
this
think
is.
another good example is like original like tobacco if it's not cured. is extremely poisonous.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't like commonly smoked until like we figured out that it had to be cured.
What about when
And now it's slightly less poison.
shoe?
As in now it's slightly less poison.
It's always like, certain things, there's always an antidote to them to make them better.
Right.
But in the simple things with the pigs, if the whole thing that Maimonides says is that, well, they're so dirty, then why can't you just, in those days, maybe, but then you can have a clean place to raise them,
Right.
and that would have made, that might like correct
That issue,
thing,
and then you.
correct that issue.
Exactly, and then.
So then you don't
continue.
have it. So it's not just so much like these people that examples are in this book, like they talk about like other things, but really that's sort of the thing, like you can correct all of these things.
Right, they're not.
It's not just,
Definite.
So
It's not a good enough answer.
it's not a good enough answer. So it comes back to this whole thing, like the holiness part.
That's exactly it, and as Eitan said as well. Let's look back at the verse, and what does, God gives us a reasoning, which was not so palatable, so we just kind of moved it to the side and tried to look for a more practical reasoning. What was the reasoning God gave us? Because it's holy. Holiness doesn't just mean to meditate on top of a mountain in India. Holiness means to perfect a person's character. We're going to see, this Nachmanides actually, who we previously said, oh, maybe fish, are concerned about health or cleanliness. We're going to actually tap into and see what he says about kosher birds. And he is one of the sources which describe that it's not about the health, the physical health, it's the health of character. And we're going to see. So text number 9. I'm going to jump around. Mike, excuse me.
The principal sign of a non-kosher bird is the fact that it is a predator. The Torah wished to distance us from such birds, for their blood is heated and causes cruelty. This stems from the black bile and will inject cruelty into the heart.
So there you go. He says, kosher birds are more merciful. None of the kosher birds are predators. They're not. Meaning, I'm not going to say if they're specifically omnivores or carnivores, but they're not predating birds, as opposed to an eagle or a hawk or a vulture. Is actually Rishalah, is a big halachic giant, and he once saw a turkey devouring another bird. And he said that he is of the opinion that turkey can't be a kosher animal because he saw it as a predator. And he asked that his descendants don't eat any turkey. So there's people till today, actually Chaya's family is from the Shalah, that some of Chaya's relatives don't eat turkey. Now, most of the other contemporary rabbis of the time said that he probably saw a turkey vulture. Because there's a certain type of vulture called a turkey vulture. They look very similar. So they say that it must have been that type of, that's one of the opinions, that it must have been that type of turkey, because a regular kosher animal is not of that nature. So we all know, and we may have seen it on t-shirts, you are what you eat. It's a real thing, and we believe in it. And continues the Nachmanides, and he says, generally, this whole idea of a person consuming something, you see text number 10. We'll jump around. Tatiana, would you like to read text number 10?
It is appropriate that man should consume whatever he needs for his basic sustenance. The prohibition of certain foods is for the purity of the soul, namely that one should eat clean things that will not generate coarseness of the soul. Thus, the verse states, "And you shall be holy people to me." That is to say, I desire that you should be people of holiness, so that you should be fitting for me to cleave me, for I am holy. Accordingly, you shall not contaminate your souls by eating abominable things.
So here he inserts a lot more clarity into necessity of eating kosher food, and that it is, he basically gives a little bit of a flow of what does eating kosher have to do with being holy. The Abarbanel actually continues, and he also says that that many not kosher foods create a blockage in a person. It creates their heart and their mind is disrupted and unable to focus and unable to relate, not because they are unclean physically, but these animals are harmful or sickly or impure. And sometimes, or many times, it's because of the nature of that animal. So, for example, the pig that rolls in the mud, hey, yeah, you can wash it off and it won't be muddy. Obviously, no one's going to serve a bacon sandwich, but it's the nature, the tendency.
They eat anything.
Huh?
They eat
They eat
anything.
anything. And all these other animals, the kosher animals, you're actually not going to delve into it as much over here, but it's very important to know. The kosher animals, the two symbols of kosher for an animal, not for a bird or a fish, is that it chews its cud and it has split hooves. And the explanation that's given, Rabbi discusses this at length, and he says, he asks the question, are animals kosher because they have split hooves and chew their cud? Or are the animals that are kosher on their own, they happen to have a certain sign that you could detect them by, an interesting sign is that they also chew their cud and have split hooves. So is the chewing their cud and split hooves a cause for them being kosher? Or is it just like, by the way, anything spotted is not kosher, Just like fins and scales. Is
Well,
it
he
that?
presumably, God created these things. So he obviously
So did
created.
God create it as a symbol to help us out, so we
Yes.
know what's kosher?
Yes.
Let's say birds. Birds don't chew their cud or have split hooves.
But
Birds,
he made some birds,
right, but
killer
birds,
birds.
right, so birds are all tradition based. The birds that we eat is all from the Torah. And it's all based on those traditions that we have. Certain things, there's a
But
certain
he
type of
made-
grasshopper that's mentioned in the Torah that's allowed to be eaten.
Right.
But
He made these things. He made some birds, what are they called? The ones that kill
Predators.
predator birds.
so my question is, did he make the split hooves and the fins and scales? So we could, we have an indication, like, okay, fine, those are kosher, or are the fins and scales what make them kosher? Did he make fins and scales and that's why these animals are kosher?
He made these animals, so therefore it was part of his plan. He made certain things that you could eat and
Absolutely.
certain things that you couldn't.
Correct, but
So-
let me hear what are some thoughts, what do you think?
All right, so what I believe to be the reasoning is Hashem put something spiritually into these animals that make them kosher versus all the rest that are not kosher.
Okay,
In order for us to know which ones are and which ones aren't, has these specific features.
so you're saying that they're features that God put on kosher animals, these are kosher, and God put these indicators so that us simple people, we don't know, like, hi, sir, are you kosher? So just God gave us a symbol, instead of it having a COR, it has split hooves and chooses God.
Exactly.
Okay,
Just like God,
any
there's
other
rules,
thoughts?
it's laws, God, there's rules about how to kill, it's not in this pamphlet, how to kill the chicken.
How to slaughter,
How
kosher
to slaughter. I presume those are in the Torah, there's rules about doing everything.
Yeah. So, yes,
I was gonna say, why then were those animals made? The ones that are not fit for human consumption. I mean, he wanted a menagerie, like he just wanted, like, this seems like a cool animal. I like this one, I like that, but don't eat this one.
Well,
Uh,
I think they need
Did-
it for
did you
something
ever
else
eat
in the
elephant?
planet.
No, because,
okay.
Well,
but.
that's to get out
but-
of miracles.
Everything is supposed to be for consumption.
Exactly,
Well,
maybe they will
no, it's a
be
good
eaten by.
question.
No,
something
no,
else
yeah.
that they need to get
It is a valid
all
question.
the animals.
Very valid question. To make a balanced ecosystem.
There you go.
I believe that has to do with it, meaning things have a purpose. But your question of why God created something. So there's a few layers to your question. I would say is, why are there these animals that are not kosher? Or maybe I'll take your question a step further. Why are there animals that are eaten but not kosher?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and like, there's a piece of this that I struggle with
Mhm.
because, to me, it sounds absurd. Like a lot of this is outmoded about what we know. Like, plenty of people eat pork and they're doing just fine.
That's
So-
exactly it.
Right. But there's also a piece of it that's like, you don't have to, like God, like you don't have to understand my reasonings. Like it's enough that I said so.
Mhm.
I mean, I want to question everything and judge everything and dissect it to its minutia, but there's sort of a peace and like a safety in saying, I don't have to understand it. He's got something going on. Maybe it doesn't make sense to me. I'll accept it at face value. And like, I don't have to be so controlling and involved, and he's got stuff under control.
That is a very strong truth. And at the same time, we're welcome to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always good to have that as your core, meaning ultimately I'm going to be doing this, but I would love to try to figure out why.
Not only are we welcome to do it, we're encouraged.
Encouraged.
We're encouraged to seek, search, learn, and find.
These type of debates are explained in at length in the Gemara. If you were to read through the Gemara and translate it, you'll see there's sages and rabbis that go back and forth. And just like we see here, Rabbi Abarbanel is disproving other rabbis based on what it is that they're contributing to help understand. So
It's like healthy discourse.
That's
yeah, and that's like constructive criticism, right? It's help building on the understanding of why this is the way it is.
Well, you could also, going back again to the apple, just, when they were first eating the apple, they didn't know that the seeds in there were cyanide, right? Like, so maybe in some ways, some of these foods there's a protective element to them that haven't yet been revealed. It's just, you have to have faith that, he's sort of looking out for you.
Right, you're saying, so the health thing still could stand. There is a certain element of health.
Sure.
Maybe the apples with the poisonous pits were because they were from the Garden of Eden. If they had eaten an apple not from the forbidden tree, then they wouldn't have been.
Oh, sense a little bit of Kabbalah here.
Be told not to eat apple?
They were told not to.
Rejected,
eat the
were they
tree of knowledge,
told?
Yeah. Adam was, exactly. Eve wasn't, and that's where the problems began, is that he didn't give over the information correctly. By the way.
It's all about
this is-
miscommunication.
Exactly.
That's what they can tell from then. You should have told Eve, and then Eve should have told Adam.
You know, when God gave the Torah, he first gave it to the woman.
Should be.
It says Beis Yisrael, but Beis Yaakov, and then Bnei Yisrael. So the Rebbe actually says the opposite of what you said. Not that what you're saying is wrong, but he actually brings in and he says, it could be that these animals are kosher because they chew their cud and have split hooves. What does that mean? Chewing the cud, regurgitating the cud, is basically consuming the food. It goes into its digestive system until a certain point, and it spits it back and it eats it again. The split hooves is ultimately that the animal is on a pedestal. Both of these elements represent the distance that this animal has from the ground. Their removement and they're detached. They're one step away from worldliness, from consumption of the food that they just ate. Number one, they ate food and they didn't just swallow it, they ate it and then they refined it more. They chewed it again. They're standing on the ground. They're like any other animal walking and who knows what, but they're split hooves. Their hooves act, instead of it being a full hoof, so it's more like they're on the ground. It's a split hoof, which indicates that it's almost like on its own stand. So even though these animals are very earthly, wouldn't necessarily go over and hug this goat that just cooked, but that's in the mud, but it's still a step above. And it's not as animalistic as other animals. So the Rebbe suggests that it's really that these things are not just indicators, it's not just a symbol. By the way, you go into the market, you just check for the split hooves. It's the split hooves and it's chewing is what makes it kosher. And we're gonna tap into that over here. We're gonna see a little bit about the kosher food and how it has an effect on a person's life. And this is achieving holiness in your dining room. And that is, as we've addressed and a couple have mentioned correctly, that the Torah laws are not just for health. It could be that there's health benefits. There's certain health benefits that people found out now. Oh, if you keep Shabbat, if someone has a work week of 7 days and doesn't rest, they could get an overdrive. So it's always good to have a day of rest. That's great. And that's what's part of society now. Everyone has a Sunday that they take a break. So we have a day earlier. People finally got the point. But that's not why we have a Shabbat. It might be a fringe benefit, but that's not the ultimate reason. So here also, kosher might have a nice, hey, we don't eat the unhealthy foods and all that, but there's more to it. And it is not just the unhealthy foods because of the cholesterol and the fat content, but because the holy cholesterol or the unholy cholesterol that we don't want to consume. And this is where we go into what you were saying about the apple or the tree of knowledge. You say it was a grape or a fig, or what you were saying about self-control, is the laws that God gave to consumption of food has very much to do with our impulse control. We are worldly people. We interact with the world in multiple ways. And kosher, as Nancy really hit it on the head, the nail on the head, kosher is a way that we are able to remind ourselves multiple times a day that I belong to something higher. I actually met a fellow once that I don't like to say someone was disconnected. I should say his primary connection to Judaism was kosher. Told me he eats kosher food, almost nothing else. I mean, he doesn't Shabbat, tefillin, mezuzah, a lot of these other things he was still struggling with, but kosher he does. I asked him, that's really cool. What's special about kosher? Because usually kosher is something people take a little later. It's very hard to do. And you always bump into not kosher food. He says, no, because I always want to have in mind, I believe in God, and I always want to have him in mind. So when I'm eating kosher, everything I eat, I'm making sure that it's kosher. And I eat often. He's like, that's what my life is all about, food. So it's always with a conscience, and I'm alert, and I'm figuring out, and I know that there's a God over here in this world. And text 13, just to give you the outside, Rashi tells us that when it comes to not kosher food, we shouldn't say, oh, it's repulsive and that's why I'm not eating it. It's actually commendable if you say, you know what, that looks really good, but I'm still not going to eat it because I was told not to. That builds character, as they say in the Scouts, right? That builds your character. That makes you a stronger person than who you are. And you're able to say, you know what? No, it doesn't stink or smell or look disgusting. It actually looks really good, but I'm not going to have that. That helps us in our life, and that's called holiness. Holiness is being able to say, holiness is being able to decline. Holiness is having your hoof split, is being able to be on a pedestal to a certain degree. Doesn't mean to be stuck up and ignore and whatever else, obviously. But it means to be able to say, I don't do that. That's below my dignity. Whether holiness is also in between people. Someone says, I could scam, I could get a few more bucks out of this. Oh, this person wouldn't notice if I took it, but I'm going to have my own self-dignity. And I'm going to do something, even though no one's watching and no one's going to ever know, because I'm holy, because there's more expected from me. And this Chassidus discusses this at length, because Chassidus really takes Kabbalah. Kabbalah is very abstract, and what Chassidus with the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, in the late 16, early 1700s, his motto and his idea, early 1700s, and then further after that, Rabbi Shneir Zalman who wrote the Tanya. It was about building a person's character and about how to take all these Kabbalistic ideas and how do you implement it in your character, making your personal, your take the character traits that you have and perfect them, use them out for good, and so on and so forth. So we have in text 14, Eitan, would you like to read, or did you just read? Text 14.
The ideal method of divine service is to accept the yoke of heaven, under which circumstances there is no sense of self, only the yoke that the master places upon himself or upon him to serve him by fulfilling the Torah and mitzvot, and to refine the world through his efforts to make for him, God, an abode in the material world. This is why in the Torah, after the words, "and you shall remember my commandments," it is stated, "and you will be holy to your God." Fulfilling the commandments makes one holy.
Makes one holy as it creates this connection, as you mentioned before, this connection of God and creator, of man and creator. Actually just saw a clip of a video, an interview with a woman who was then, not sure if she was studying in college or she was a professor in college. And she had a whole bunch of questions when she met with the Lubavitch Rebbe. It was in the 70s. And she wrote down just a couple of questions to ask him, but she had tons more and she didn't want to bother him and use the Rebbe's time. So she asked her a couple of questions and the Rebbe said, "Do you have anything more questions?" Like, "Oh, yeah, I do." One of the questions she asked some very interesting questions. One of the questions that she asked was, if God's so great, why does he care about the nuances? If God's the creator of the world, and he literally is, billions of people in the world, and he created it all and created all the galaxies, and he cares if I take a piece of shrimp and eat it, seriously. He doesn't have better things to look at, like bug off, what he minds, like he gets so caught up on small little, he's such a perfectionist, if the tablecloth is not 100%, like, God, come on, leave it alone. Why does he get so caught up on the details? And ultimately the Rebbe responded that it's not about him, it's about us.
Yeah.
These are opportunities that he's giving you. He is so great. And God, it's greater than anything else. These are small little connection points that are abilities to plug in. So if someone doesn't eat kosher, they're losing that opportunity. We're not saying, yeah, the devil's coming after you. That's not the point. Point is that here's an opportunity. God's tossing you that life-saving, tube to catch on to. And you're saying, that's okay, thanks. You just had another opportunity, another phone call, another meeting, another FaceTime, another Zoom that God offered to be there for you. And you said, no, not today. There was someone that I spoke to about the film just recently. Oh, I got in Starbucks last week. We went out for coffee and he told me, he said he puts on tefillin every single day. And he said those 15 minutes that he puts on tefillin, his whole family knows that he's busy then and, preoccupied. And he said that's his connection point. He said he feels that he connects to God by putting on his tefillin. He feels that he's able to, have that open line. And he was saying that, he said he told his wife about, just prayer, even though women don't wear tefillin, they don't need the tefillin, but that prayer, a few minutes of prayer, a few minutes of connection. But we won't. Coming back to our kosher discussion is this connection. And source 15 is one of the most fascinating statements. And it's actually a statement that we say, that those who say Kaddish say at the end of reading the Mishnah. They say this over, and it says, Rabbi Chanina ben Akashya Omer, Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakis es Yisrael lefichav hir b'lahem Torah mitzvos. Rabbi Chanina ben Akashya said, God wanted to find a way to benefit the Jewish people. He wanted to be mezake, he wanted to give this specialty, a special gift. And he's trying to think, what can I give the Jewish people as a gift? Here, b'lahem Torah mitzvahs. God decided, you know what? I could make more mitzvahs and more Torah. You tell a student in class, imagine, in 5th grade, you say, you know what? Your teacher loves you so much, he actually wants to give you an extra hour a day. The kids come like, no, but if you think about it, if you had an opportunity to study more, if you have an opportunity to connect with someone, the greatest gift is that time. You think about it in a relationship, you think about it in someone special in our lives, or someone, that stands, whether it's a world person that's special. I'm not gonna get into politics and try to give titles to anything, but someone that we could think about being special, more than a gift that they can give you is their time and their presence. And that's what God gives us. God said he wants to give something special to the Jewish people, and therefore he gives us Torah mitzvahs. And when we keep kosher, and we are doing it not because there's a specific reason. We had reasons. We have an explanation. We gave a reason about the self-improvement. We gave a reason about impulse control. A person learns to, control himself. We discussed about when someone eats something, it's a refinement of character. You're going to eat something has a negative character traits. It could spill over to your negative. It could, reawaken negative character traits in ourselves. And ultimately, it also could help in the line of between us and God and between us and mankind. And this is where we tie into the whole idea of peace. True peace is being able to bridge a gap of this world, the world of physicality and the world of spirituality, the world of what we see and the world of holiness. So when God tells us, be holy, that doesn't mean go on a mountaintop in India and don't talk for 30 years. That's being angelic. That's not being a human holy person. Being holy is taking the world that we know and using it in a holy way. What's more impressive, a person who doesn't speak or a person who speaks kindly? It's my father actually just told me this. He said that this week's Torah portion, it's shoftim, judges. It's all about judges and setting up courts of order and health and police officers. Shoftim.
That's Saturday's Torah portion.
That's Saturday's Torah portion. Shoftim the shoftim.
That's very interesting.
And
My father was a lawyer.
Oh yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Oh wow, that is very special.
It's Friday. Well, it
Friday,
said it
this
was
is yard
Friday,
sale.
but we split it over to Saturday.
Absolutely, no, it's the week of the yard sale. Okay,
Yeah,
that's definitely not a coincidence.
Nothing's a coincidence.
That's right. So he said, so make a long story short, that it says that shoftim meshotrim it says that there should be policemen and guards at the gates of the cities, making sure that there's law and order. So it's explained, a lot of commentaries explain it's not just the cities, the gates of your cities, but it's also the gates of a person's body. Meaning a person has many entrances and exits. A person has to make sure that the proper things are coming in and out. A person shouldn't look at things that aren't good. A person shouldn't say something that isn't good. A person shouldn't listen to gossip and negativity and so on and so forth. Eat something that isn't. So, and it says that our body has ways of blocking the entrances. You could close your eyes with your eyelids. You could even plug your ears with your earlobe, and you could close your lips. But the lips, the mouth has two sets. It has teeth and lips, because to hold your tongue is very difficult. Close your eyes is very easy, but to hold your tongue is very difficult. And they say that the person says that the not kosher meat, speaking of not kosher, says in the Torah actually, when you have not kosher meat, you could, you're living in a Jewish community, you could toss the meat to the dogs, give it to animals. So it says, why the dogs? Why does it mention the dogs? It says when there was the 10 Commandments by Mount Sinai, when it was that experience of receiving the Torah, the dogs didn't bark. Dogs were respectful, they didn't bark during that experience. So as a reward, it says in the Torah, give it to the camel. So there was a rabbi once asked, he said, if you look back in the story, another animal that did, beyond what is expected from it were the frogs in Egypt. says that they jumped into the ovens of the Egyptians just to punish the Egyptians. They were martyrs. They literally jumped into the ovens to be baked just to bother the Egyptians. So really, we should give our not kosher meat to the frogs. Why to the dogs? So my father told me in the name of some rabbi, but it was a good line, and it's connected to what we're saying. Said because it's easier to jump into a fire than to hold your tongue. Sometimes it's easier to jump into an oven and not to say a comment that you really want to say, or But so this is what it's about: is peace and creating that connection, that piece of kedusha, holiness, and us. And we'll tie back into the Talmud of Brachot, of Chanam, that he says was the first source, which was that Reb Chanan said there are three types of peace. The river, the candle, the kettle, excuse me, the river, the bird, and the kettle. And the reason that he says these three things are peace are in a certain order. It's explained as follows, very fascinating, that a river is, and definitely was, the source of commerce. People would do business using the river. If you traveled around Europe and even in the States and in Canada as well, the main cities, bigger cities, metropolises are all built around bodies of water because that's how they were able to do business. So a river was ultimately a connection point, was a time or a place or a way to create commerce and relationships and create connections, which a connection between two people is, whether it's two colleagues, a spouse, whether it's friends, working partners, that's a basic level of connection. But two people coming together, two people are respectful, two people are friendly, and that is peaceful. The next thing that's brought down is the pot or the kettle. The pot or the kettle represents also peace, the coming together of fire and water. How's that? The only way you're able to have fire and water come together is if the fire is outside and the water is inside the kettle. And that way the kettle, it's making a small separation, but ultimately it's the one that's bonding them together, bringing them together. So even though by nature, water and fire are opposites, and they will put each other out, fire will consume the water or water will put out the fire. By having a kettle there, it's able to make that peace. It's able to keep them both in their own respective locations, but are able to live in unison, so to say. Comes the third one, and that's the bird. And the bird is a creature of both heaven and earth. Bird is not just fly, but a bird lives on the ground. A bird could walk as well. So here's an animal or a creature that is able to be both here and there. And that really is the ultimate level of peace, that a person is able to balance both of these elements. So we live in a world, and as a Jew, we're expected to be able to balance these things. We live in a world that is very secular. It's not a world that says holiness and kedusha and all the wonderful things. It's a world that's not noticeable that there's a God, and we're expected to live in such a world. And at the same moment, God also expects us to be able to tap into something higher, to have a moment to pray, to keep kosher, to have a mezuzah on our door. And we discussed last week, so when you walk in and out, you remember that this is a Jewish home and it's guarding me when I walk out, and it's my safety and security. To light Shabbat candles on a Friday evening, all these things, but fill in all these types of elements is like this element of the bird, the highest level of peace. And that is creating a real connection between the earth and the heavens. And ultimately, that's what kosher is. Kosher is the most mundane, not holy thing. Food. Food is the most, if someone wants to be holy, they're going to fast. They're going to stay away from food. But specifically with food, God tells us that's how you can be holy. You could be holy by eating, but eat it properly. Make a bracha, say a l'chaim, drink some kosher wine. Make it kosher, and then you're on the right path. So this ends the official class. Welcome for questions, comments, complaints. You can give my wife now. But this is the general idea. If you could pass me the wine, actually, I want to say a little l'chaim, both for Shlema and for yard site. If anyone would like to join me. Thank you. Can I quote you on that? L'chaim to that. So Chaim David Ben Tzvi. Neshama should have an aliyah, have the greatest ascent and be a blessing for his family and all people. Chaim. And Rivka Bat Miriam.